Okay, so good morning everyone. I'm Christina Bueta. I'm the manager at the Centre for Constitutional Rights, and I would like to warmly welcome you today to our breakfast dialogue and today we're focusing on women and justice. So as we're nearing the end of August, celebrating women in a bittersweet way, we decided it would be an ideal opportunity to actually sit down and have a frank discussion regarding this multi-layered topic on women and access to justice. So we've asked speakers from different fields to share their views on possible obstacles in accessing justice, gender equality, as well as finding realistic solutions to fight gender-based violence. So as we sit here today, we are all very aware, unfortunately, of the shocking statistics regarding gender-based violence. In 2017-18 alone, SUBS recorded about 110 rapes per day, and a total of 50,108 sexual offences were recorded. Now, as shocking as these stats are, it is highly doubtful that they're actually a realistic impression of these crimes being committed. As the nature of the crimes, it's quite an intimate crime, and there's quite a lack of reporting as well. So if we look at an aspect and topic such as gender-based violence, it obviously has a lot of dimensions to it. If we consider Stats SA's latest report, or the 2018 report actually, on crimes against women, some interesting and very disturbing patterns are revealed regarding reporting, perception, and attitude towards crime. So according to the report, an unexpected finding was that women had the same pattern of attitude towards domestic violence as men. So they measured it in various categories, and they figured out that for both men and women, the highest percentage of individuals said it was acceptable for a man to hit a woman if she argues with him. So what Stats SA's report recognized is that attitudes and belief regarding violence against women are critical factors we need to address. So in my opinion, any attempt to solve gender-based violence needs to take into account these social dynamics. So if we turn to an aspect such as gender equality, and we can go on about it as well, we have made big strides in the workplace, and we've got progressive laws, but reality it doesn't necessarily reflect in practice. So if we look at the Commission for Employment Equity's latest report, it is quite interesting. On the level of skilled and technical, as well as professional, qualified, and middle management, we actually have quite a good improvement of equitable representation regarding women. But it seems from middle management and junior management to professionally qualified level to top and senior management, that pattern doesn't seem to follow through. So there's a lacuna and a specific gap we need to address. So finally, we also need to recognize positive developments, and we will expand on it hopefully today regarding one of the speakers. So we have quite a high representation of women in Parliament, and if we consider it internationally, South Africa ranks one of the highest in this regard. And again, we need to delve a little bit deeper, and we have to ask, how involved are women in politics? And also look at representation of women in political parties, as obviously indirectly reflects policies being driven. So today I've just briefly touched on some aspects which our speakers will hopefully expand on, and I would like to introduce our speakers quickly. So we've got Professor Amanda Cox, who's no stranger to your media. She is, just say if I talk too fast. I talk very, very fast, so I apologize. So we've got Professor Amanda Cox. As I said, she is a professor in political sciences at the University of Stellenbosch. She specializes in gender politics and gender behaviors, and she was also a former commissioner at the Commission for Gender Equality. Then we got Karabo Khakhau here. Khakhau? Yes, sorry, I had it right. Khakhau. We had this whole Afrikaans discussion and how I would pronounce it, and it makes sense. So as far as I know, you are the youngest member of Parliament in the Free State Provincial Legislature, if I'm correct. And she was also a former president of UCT's SRC, so thank you so much for coming so far to be here today, and we're looking forward to hearing a young, empowered voice as well. And finally, we also have Sanja Bornman, who heads the Gender Equality Program at Lawyers for Human Rights, and she is a fierce advocate for policy reform. So we've got very diverse speakers speaking today, and we hope please contribute to this discussion, ask questions. I know it's a little bit early still, but hopefully you all had your second cup of coffee, so please engage. And finally, this event today would not have been possible without the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, our partner to this event, and I want to thank you very much for your continued support. So I'm going to quickly introduce you to Christian Enders from Konrad Adenauer Foundation to say a few words, and then we can immediately start with Professor Gouws. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
That's what I like. There was definitely a second, possibly a third cup of coffee in the room, I think. A colleague of ours said a couple of days ago that winter is definitely over. Yes, she's to blame for this today. Oh, terrible weather. Yes, so I'm from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. We're a German political foundation, founded in 1955, promoting the rule of law, multi-party democracy, and finally, the social market economy. The reason why we're supporting this event today is because we would like to form spaces where people can exchange ideas that are fundamentally political. So in the room here, this is a seedbed of politics. We learn about ideas, we learn about facts, we exchange numbers, and then we politically associate, and then after a while, politics changes. So we feel it's very important that all of you are here this morning, as early as it is, because we are here to learn, firstly from all the speakers, but then finally to take action on that as well, and to inform other people. So thank you very much for being here. I think this is one of the strongest panels I've ever seen on the topic, so I'm very, very excited to see what you say. I'd like to take a couple of words to step back to the conceptual history of ideas that sits behind this topic, which is equality before the law and human rights. The Konrad Adenauer Foundation is linked to the Christian Democratic Union in Germany, which has been the dominant party in Germany since the Second World War. It's the party of Angela Merkel, the ruling party of Germany. And a couple of times when I've said the Christian Democratic Union, people have come to me afterwards and said, I would also like to have a Christian state. And this is really not where the party has evolved, but rather it's saying that our ideas of democratic discourse originate out of our faiths. This is quite an interesting idea. The reason being that when we speak about something like equality, this is not something you can measure, right? It's not something that is empirically part of our material world. It's an idea, and it's a reality that we decide on between ourselves. All of us between ourselves, and then from there on into society. And these moral questions are not new questions. They go back thousands of years, and our faiths are the places where these ideas have been developed. And from there on, our modern political dispensation has been built. So it's just worth remembering the background to these ideas. And from there on, I think it's very important to remember that what we're discussing is really about morality and ethics. Right? We want to think about the kind of society that we want to build. And it's worth remembering that even though we have laws, not everything that is right morally is legal. And not everything that is wrong morally is illegal. And this is something that we really want to carry forward to our politicians as well, is that the moral imperative is something that drives forward our law and then that forms our society. So I look forward very much to hearing especially the perspective from the Provincial Legislature and somebody who's very politically active. And I wish you all a very, very enlightening and hopefully exciting discussion this morning. Thank you very much.
And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm a political scientist, and I have a research chair in gender politics, so I'm very focused on issues of justice, but looking at it then from a political perspective. I think what we need to remember when I start here is that gender equality is written into our Constitution. And in the equality clause, there are 5 grounds that's very important for gender equality. 5 grounds of the 17 on which we're not allowed to discriminate, which is sex, gender. Gender is the construct that revolves around what people think are the roles of men and women. Sexual orientation, pregnancy, and marital status. So if we want to talk about access to justice, I think we need to also understand what are the sources of gender inequality. And first of all, attitudinal, right? The things that we learn that's really connected to those roles of men and women that have changed dramatically over the past few decades, but we still think about them and socialize children into them. So women are caregivers and homemakers, men are the breadwinners, and so on. The more, I think, structural issues then has got to do with money, right? So if we look at South Africa, which is the most unequal country in the world, if we use the Gini coefficient, then the gap between the rich and the poor is the biggest in the world. And that means that very often people are excluded from economic resources. So we have 18 million people living on social grants. In other words, they're getting money from the government to stay alive and to survive. 18 million people is a large number of people. Violence, of course. Christine has already mentioned the very high statistics for violence and intimate femicide, in other words, where women are killed by their intimate partners. And in other words, that if you're not safe in your own home, you're not safe in a relationship, we cannot talk about equality. And then religion was mentioned by my colleague from Konrad Adenauer, but religion also contributes to gender equality, right? When the places and the status of women and men are justified from the Bible, the point that was made about disciplining women, very often that's justified from the Bible. So religion also contributes or can contribute to gender equality. And culture, there's a strong link between gender and culture. But culture is, I think, the thing that's the most invisible for us because we live our cultures. That is how we understand the world. It's that common sense understanding of the world. And very often we don't think about how culture contributes to gender inequality. So people often take out the cultural defense, right? So the idea that being gay is un-African, that's my culture, being gay is not what we do here. And all of us have culture, right? So very often we hark back to those ideas that we were socialized into our cultures. And that is what I want to talk about today, is how culture actually can prevent access to justice and how culture socializes ideas about equality that's very often very problematic. I'm looking here at the theory of Nancy Fraser. She's a theorist, a feminist theorist, who talks about recognition and redistribution. Now, what that means is that we have to recognize people's identities, right? So we are women and we are men, and not only in the biological sense, but also in the gender construction sense. And we need to understand that if you don't recognize certain identities, you're not going to have the necessary redistribution of resources. In other words, we have certain issues that we need to solve through the redistribution of resources, but unless those identities are recognized, we don't even start to think about the redistribution. So gender inequality is a form of gender injustice, or the lack of justice, the lack of access to justice, where we can think of justice as fairness. That has far-reaching consequences for the recognition of women's identities and for the redistribution of resources. Now, if we think about the debate in South Africa at the moment about the decriminalization of sex work, and this is a very controversial issue. But what decriminalization means is that it's not legalized. It's different from making it legal. It means it becomes just another job, and then it's regulated through other legislation. But at the moment, sex work is illegal. So what it means is we don't recognize the identities of women who are sex workers. And we have this idea that we can eradicate sex work, right? We can do away with it. It's the oldest profession as we know it, and as long as people are desperate in many ways, there will be sex work. And sometimes sex work is also a choice. So what decriminalization actually requires is that the state makes it possible for women who are sex workers to access resources, access to healthcare, access to protection from the police, and issues like that. And we have other identities. We've seen there's been a big struggle towards the recognition of transgender people now, right? In the past, we never even talked about transgender people. Now it's some of you may have read in the papers about the issue of toilets, that people who are transitioning from one gender to the other feel that they cannot go into certain toilets because it's unsafe. So that is again a recognition of a certain identity. The same with LGBTIQ, lesbian, gay, intersex, queer people. We need to recognize the identities in order to create justice. So for women, there are two dimensions of injustice. It's unequal distribution of resources and a misrecognition of identities. And as long as we have misrecognition, we talk about a status injury, right? So you cannot have the status of equality with men, and I don't want to stick to this sort of men-women binary, but in a sense that's what we're talking about today, is about access for women. Now we're a multicultural society, and what that means is that there are many different cultures living in South Africa. We have different ethnic groups, but we've also got different religions, different language groups, so it makes it for a very complicated society. And what we've seen is that very often now we focus on identity politics, right? I think the whole issue of people wanting their identities to be recognized make us forget about structural inequalities. And I think what the student uprisings in 2015, 2016 have shown us, right, the issue of black pain, is that unless students' identities are recognized, coupled with the notion of free education, right? So it's a struggle for the recognition of the identity as well as for the redistribution of resources through equal education. But we cannot only have identity politics. And I think for a while there we've seen people just talking about identities and black pain in a sense that only focuses on that identity. But it needs to be coupled with notions of structural inequality. Okay. So, and Fraser's argument is that we need what is called the parity of participation. So this is how people have equal access to participate in politics, right? What we have in South Africa is representative democracy. So we choose our representatives when we go to the polls and we vote. We vote actually for a list of people, and we very often don't even know who's on that list, right? So we fill the seats in Parliament from the top of the list. And we hope that those representatives will represent our issues in Parliament. We have 44% women in Parliament, and it's been said already this morning, the highest, or one of the highest in the world. But that's only descriptive participation. So what this means is that they're the numbers. We have a quota. The ANC is the only party with a quota, hoping to have 50%, but the other parties bring the average down. So we have 44%. But what we need is substantive equality, or substantive representation. Now what that means is that the people we elect will also put the issues, and in this case the issues of women, on the political agenda. And one needs to ask the question, why is it the obligation of women to do this, right? What about the men in Parliament? But we, what we actually now think when we elect women is that they will put the issues on the agenda. And what the last decade or more has shown us that it's not the case, right? That women, and this has got to do with the internal politics of a political party. You know, people become factionalized, they have to make choices, they have to support certain factions, and it becomes very difficult to put gender issues on the agenda because it's going to rock the boat. And so this is what we actually don't have the parity of participation, even if that's what will make the difference for us as women. So until women can speak on their own behalf and have their issues included in the political agenda, we won't have substantive representation. But we talk about the recognition of identities, the redistribution of resources, but who does that? Who's responsible for it, right? We can't just say, okay, we need that. We need recognition, we need redistribution. It's the state. And the state does that through legislation, right? Making policy and making legislation. So we must recognize the role of the state. And what we can say in the year 2019 is that the state is consistently failing women. So how has this failure come about? First of all, the lack of substantive representation. But in 1994, after the first election, we had an architecture in the state. And what that means is there were structures that was supposed to promote women's equality in the state. We had an Office of the Status of Women, Women's Empowerment Units, the Joint Monitoring Committee on the Quality of Life and the Status of Women, cross-party gender caucus, gender desk in all the civil service departments, and the Autonomous Commission for Gender Equality, that's in Chapter 9 of the Constitution. All of that has been rolled back. What we now have in its place is a Ministry for Women, Youth and People with Disabilities, so lumping all kinds of identities together and talking about vulnerable groups. Now, if we say people are vulnerable, we're already deciding that they are victims, that they don't have decision-making power, that they need to be protected, and very often protected by the men who abuse them. So when we designed the architecture, we did not want the ministry. The argument was exactly the problem with putting everything in one place and then forget about it, right? And we've seen this ministry, 4 ministers of women later, there's still no policy, national policy on gender-based violence. The mandate of the first minister was to create a council, a national council on gender-based violence. Still not up and running. But I want to talk about the traditional courts bill that was actually defeated because 7 of the 9 provinces voted against it, as well as women's organizations and the Commission for Gender Equality. But this bill is going to be reintroduced to Parliament, and it is completely unconstitutional. So what does the bill say? In its past form, I'm not sure how it's been redrafted, but in the past form it said, women cannot present themselves in these courts. They have to, so women can't go there, they have to be presented by male family members, and they cannot speak. The men speak for them. It fails to recognize a full range of traditional courts, and women can't exit. So it means that, you know, if women say we don't want to have a hearing in this court, we're going to the magistrate's court or some other court, that's not possible. And they can't be agents of the court, so work in the courts. And one also then have to ask, how can lesbian women expect a fair hearing if the courts are completely male-dominated? And courts can impose severe sentences such as forced labor or corporal punishment on women who are in breach of the law. So if you look at this, it's completely unconstitutional. If we think about the grounds of non-discrimination, it is full of discriminatory practices. This bill went through Parliament with it at the time with 42% women. So how is this possible, right? And I think this is the issue of how can you access justice if the state who is supposed to protect the rights of women are actually involved in making discriminatory legislation. So what was recognized in this bill was the identities and the work of traditional leaders, but not of women. Where we did recognize the identities of women was with the Customary Marriages Act in 1998. So this act meant that women, for years women have said that they are being discriminated against, because if a woman or a couple gets divorced or the husband dies, women loses everything. They do not inherit. So this bill changed the fact that marriages had to be registered. It changed the age of marriage to 18 and so on. But it did not change the inheritance regime, which means that we are still fighting to change that. And I think there's legislation being made at the moment. And until last year, it did not recognize Muslim marriages, right? So people married under Muslim law, their marriages were not recognized, which meant women, once husband died or there's divorce, same situation. So there was no parity of participation in these processes. So what are the remedies that we have for this type of problem? And if we specifically talk about the customary, people living under customary law, and we have about 20 million people living under customary law. So that's the law that regulate people living in rural areas. Now, first of all, people can say they want to exit, that they want to be treated under civil law, or what is better is that we would recognize the hybrid identities of people, right? So sometimes, and I've just done a study on issues of how women and men perceive their identities in relation to culture. And what is very clear is that people have hybrid identities. So sometimes they're in urban areas, sometimes they're in rural areas. They travel between these different areas, and they both respect the laws as pertaining to urban areas, civil law, and they both respect customary law. So, and this is what legal pluralism means. But it doesn't mean that we can discriminate against people through customary law. And that we need women to participate in the decisions that are being made under customary law. We also have to give women autonomy and voice. In other words, we need to hear what women have to say. And what is important, if all this fails, is activism and women's mobilization. Now, what this means is that what we've seen in 1994 was a big groundswell movement called the Women's National Coalition. And what that did was to create, it contacted 1 million women on grassroots level to ask them, what do you want in that Bill of Rights? So we created a Charter of Rights. And that was handed to President Mandela in 1994. But there was a big cooperation between the women's movement and the state at the time. Right now, the women's movement is very, well, we don't have a national movement, but there's a lot of work going on community level. But there's a very little consultation going on between the state and civil society. And I think this is why we saw total shutdown, why we saw other types of movements now saying that we need to make an input into what government actually does, into legislation, into policy, and in that sense, make a contribution to how we are going to redistribute resources. Because without resources, we can do very little. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gouws. I think you've given us so much to talk about later. You're going to have a lot of questions. Be prepared. And I especially enjoyed your discussion on the bills. We currently also are monitoring quite a few of them, and it's very concerning, as you've highlighted as well. Okay, so next up we've got Karabo, Ms. Karabo Khakhau. Khakhau. I apologize again. Yes, so if you can come up, please. And we'll have afterwards, we'll have Sanja Bornman, and then we'll have our Q&A.
morning, everyone.
Good morning.
No, you don't sound really awake. Let's try again. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yeah, that's more like it. I think as heartbreaking as conversations about justice for women, because quite frankly we should all be tired of having these conversations are, I think we can all be excited that at least we're getting somewhere, hopefully. So, as has been introduced, my name is Karabo, Khakhau, Africa, When I got the invitation to come speak on women and justice, I scratched my scalp quite a lot of times, thinking, how exactly is it that South Africa has one of the best democratic constitutions in the world, and yet we haven't reached anywhere, any destination that could be regarded as sane enough to speak to this constitution, particularly when having conversations about the representation of women in society. And firstly, before we get anywhere, I think we should all agree that conversations on the representation of women and their power aren't conversations that are merely meant to be had in August or just celebrated on the 9th of August. These are everyday conversations that we're meant to be having, and we need to start making that an adopted culture. And so, before I get anywhere, the biggest issue before the Constitution is the cultural perception of what a woman is in society, where her role is, what she's meant to do, what she's not meant to do, what she's meant to look like, what she's meant to carry herself like. And I think that's the biggest trap that we have. Because one, you grow up in a society that is so entrenched in patriarchy, that patriarchy is the fabric of every layer you have in society, that it's so difficult to escape. So difficult that even when you try to socialize yourself into whatever being you regard yourself as, you constantly have to juxtapose against patriarchy. You grow up in a house and you're told your father has the final say in the house, and therefore you need to respect him more than you respect your mother. You grow up being told that I am supposed to dress in a particular manner because, God forbid, some uncle who's a perverted-minded being is going to look at you and think you're not worthy of walking the same grounds as he does in society. You grow up in a society where you were told that as a young woman, in order for you to be successfully regarded a woman, a strong woman that is, you have to be married and have children, otherwise, no, you're just one of those modern chicks who think they've made it in life but haven't. You grow up in the same society that tells you that actually, if you're going to want to be successful in society, you always have to reference your identity, your success against that of a man, which is quite frankly ridiculous. What makes it more ridiculous is that we have systems in place that can easily curb these ridiculous ideas, but nothing much has been done. And these systems don't have to be anything dramatic, but two: the social development department, nationally and provincially, but secondly, the educational system across all board. Imagine living in a world where school was taken as an opportunity to groom young people to live in a world where they don't have to think as people currently think right now. You have subjects such as life orientation and social science in school. What purpose do they serve? This is the question we're supposed to be learning. You're learning about Adolf Hitler. I remember in school I had to make a project presentation, which I got 100% whoop. I'm so happy about that. But it was useless because I had to make a presentation about Adolf Hitler, his historical whatevers, and his life, which is great to know about the atrocity, you know, the bad things that people face in life. But I mean, it doesn't speak to the lived realities of the people of the country in which you live in. If we could have conversations in class on how to regard a human being as a human being and not in relation to whatever genital position they hold, whatever sexual orientation they may have, and whether they have boobs or not, we could actually be moving forward. If we could be having conversations in society on how to treat human beings equally, irrespective of where they come from and what they look like, we would then be able to work within minds that ensure that moving forward, when you have a perception of a woman, the conversation is not on women's justice, but is on human justice. And so, I want to share a story, too. As a politician, I campaign a lot, and now in the Free State, in the Maluti-Apo municipality, we have by-elections. So I was there last week and the week prior to that, campaigning, all excited, yay. And I had a public meeting at the time. I had to address communities from different ages. The community compressed people from different age groups. And I would like to imagine that I'm a bubbly being. I say hi to everyone, I'm always smiling. So I come across this elderly gentleman, and I'm all excited. And he's like, you are not wearing anything on your head. There's no scarf, there's no book. I can see your arms, and so, it's not happening. And I was like, okay. I took it with a pinch of salt, and I was like, all right, sure. I greeted his wife, and that was a success. So, and then I had another encounter. And an encounter, I was driving back home to Bloemfontein. I drove past my grandmother's place, which she's now at an old age home. So they have, when you enter the gate, you have to write your registration plate, numbers, and all of those things. And so I'm driving my own car, and the gentleman looks at me. He's like, wow, you must have a husband that really loves you, hey? And I'm like, huh? He's like, yeah, no. He bought you this car. And I'm like, no, I bought this car myself. I do not have a husband, and I do not need to be qualified based on my marital status. I was so furious, actually, which I still am right now. I genuinely am. And so, but little things such as these are things that could be changed through an education system. Just as much as in your household you teach your child to say, hello ma'am, hello sir, do not steal, do not lie, this is how you present yourself in society. Just as much as you learn mathematics, that x to the power of the parabola, whatever, all of those other things that you learn in life science, that these things are things that could easily be educated within our educational system. People could be conscientized easily, and it doesn't have to be a massive conversation. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we experience is, as much as that's where we need to start, we're here where we are right now. We have the society that we have, and we have the National Department, the Ministry for Women, Young People, and Differently Abled Beings. How great. So, this is the same department, and you mentioned, Prof. Gouws, that this is the same department in the 5th administration, the previous administration. That same ministry still sat genuinely with a policy revampment, question mark, not even progress, question mark. It is the 6th parliament currently, and Dololo Miyagas was taking place. Dololo movement, much Dololo, really. And it's disappointing, because so much time is being invested in having fruitless conversations on the policy direction we're supposed to be taking, whereas, quite frankly, if any department were to be serious about their job, their work in implementing fruitful change on the ground, yes, you could have policy revampments and whatever that need to take place, but most of the energy would be seen on the ground, interacting with people on a daily basis, which doesn't happen, actually. When last did you hear that the ministry was involved on the ground, talking to people, finding out how to best capacitate marginalized beings in society? When last did you hear that happening? You look at throughout the budget debates, when you follow the budget discussions, the budget is nowhere near the ground. The budget is administrative, and that's it. The administration that's quite bloated, that you don't see where it goes and doesn't really change the lives of people, which is useless. At the end of the day, taxpayers, I cry all the time when I look at my payslip and I think of all the other South Africans who pay chunks and chunks of tax that should be used to better the lives of the people, but dollar never is being done. So these are the kind of things that we see. So the biggest problem, actually, is administrative. How? Not only in terms of this ministry nationally, but I mean across board. You look at the levels of poverty that we face in the country, and you get to realize that people who receive the heat mostly are women and young children. When you were poor, and you live in a household with 6 other children, you depend on social grants, you were supposed to make sure there's food on the table, you're supposed to hopefully think that the municipality could have made sure that you have water, you have a running toilet, and you have electricity in the house. It's an awkward position to be in. It's a sad position to be in, because if only the state were to do its duty, then we would deal with little bits of these things. Because before we could even have conversations of how is it that I could be proudly a woman in society, stand up, live a life of dignity, I need to have basic services, which I do not have, and I need to fend for myself. I don't have the education, I do not have the connection, and I do not have the monetary capacity to be able to move myself from one point to the next point, which is the majority reality of most South Africans in the country, which is painful. So dealing with little things such as those gets us a step further, but alas, we find an administration that is always not ready to take people forward, and it becomes a lip service all the time, but in actual fact, when it comes to the implementation of things, nothing materializes much. And you see this actually across board, not only in terms of municipal, provincial, and national department efficiencies, but also there's one department across board that pains me. That's the police. I, in the Free State Legislature, serve under the Police, Roads and Transport Portfolio Committee. And it's not working out, because one, in provinces, you can't have a conversation really much about police and how they're going to move, because you don't have the competency or the constitutional mandate to do so. So you shifted again to Bekicele, hoping Bekicele is gonna do the things, but Bekicele is gonna do the things. And you have conversations on horrific statistics that speaks to how you can walk into a police station as a woman, being sexually assaulted, being told that, one, are you sure you did not provoke him? Secondly, not having rape kits, or thirdly, being like, yeah, no, I think he's your husband, go talk to him and come back tomorrow morning and find out if it's okay. Tell him, no man, your uncle, was he drunk? Probably that should explain what happened. Go back and salvage the situation. No, my life is at threat right now, yeah, no, but we don't really have cars or vans to go see what's going on, Let's try again tomorrow. That time, you live in fear, you live in pain, you live in the embarrassment, you are dehumanized as a human being, and you constantly have to live with the same person who hurt you, when the administration is the reason why you're now being failed and it could have easily been helped. And even if you do get help at the end of the day, the justice doesn't even come out at the end of the day, because some don't get arrests. You don't even, if they do, then the rehabilitation process in the country is terrible. You do not have. I was having a conversation, I think it was at the beginning of the year, with a friend of mine. She's wearing a black beret there, where she's sitting. She was having a chat, actually, she's very passionate about this. She was having a chat about how the rehabilitation system of the country really serves absolutely no purpose. Because you get into a jail, you said, Nandi, for some people who come from poverty, oh yes, I have food, I have water, I have somewhere to sleep. And then you think of the next strategy, you make a few connections inside, you go out and you repeat the same cycle over and over again. Absolutely no rehabilitation, and it serves absolutely no purpose, even for me as a woman, to go and report a man who has abused me, who has harassed me, who has taken away my humanity, who has taken away my dignity, and absolutely reduced me to something less than even an ant in society. So, because I'm not going to get the justice that they need, they're not going to change the social order, and I'm going to remain in fear. So these are the little things that we see within a society and within our departments that actually cripple the ability of women to get the justice that they need, to get the lives that they deserve at the end of the day. But this is the awkward part again, for conservatives that is. We have conversations about women, and the first thing that pops into one's mind when they think of a woman is a vagina and boobs. Yeah, I said it, that's how it is. And you see we seem to forget in society that we have members of the LGBTQIA++ community. We live in a South Africa whose constitution affords everybody the right to associate themselves with whatever identity they think is okay. So what then happens when we try to emancipate previously marginalized groups whom are typically predominantly female-bodied beings, and yet we have gentlemen who walk into the room and be like, I identify as a woman, surely I should be granted the same opportunities that women are being granted. And that's now the awkward part in the conversation for some people, and mostly because then conversations on emancipation, conversations on justice always have to do with the past. And the past being the commonly understood, commonly known. And the past doesn't always do with the previously unknown, the previously hidden. I don't think it's rocket science for us to understand that we've lived in a society where coming out as a proudly gay being or a male-bodied being who recognizes themselves as a woman could be regarded as either me being possessed by evil spirits, or either generally me being absurd, they being socially, emotionally, psychologically, absolutely everything wrong with me, and me not being afforded the opportunity to exist in the same world as everybody else. And so conversations on justice for women should be cognizant of this. I haven't really fully wrapped my mind around how exactly we need to go about this, but I think this is where we need to start poking such things and start talking to say, yes, as a woman, I haven't been given opportunities. Yes, I have been told that my place is in the kitchen. Yes, I have been told that in order for me to fully exist and care for my children, I need to allow my husband to do everything for me, and I just need to make sure that all the napkins are ready, need to make sure that we have enough candlelights, and we need to make sure that the house is clean and there's food on the table for my husband when he comes back and the poor children. Yet forgetting that in the same society, there were men who were forced to live lives that they couldn't live because they couldn't get their identities out. And do not get me wrong, I'm not reducing the struggle of female-bodied beings to those of male-bodied beings who wanted to. They're two separate things. But these are people who are in the same category, and therefore any policy that speaks to their emancipation needs to be cognizant to this. It can't be a blanket approach, as we currently witness it right now. I'm going to give you an example, and I'm almost done. I'm going to give you an example. I also serve in the Public Works and Infrastructure Portfolio Committee. I sat in that portfolio committee together with the Police, Roads and Transport, and I sat into the Public Accounts Committee for fun the other day, just to find out what's going on. And I asked the same question to all three departments. I still don't have an answer, a valid one that is. So the question I asked was, how far are all of the departments? So firstly, let me backtrack. So all of the departments had conversations on how they are trying to employ more people that reflect the diversity that we have on the ground. They're trying to ensure that we have more women in ranks, as we need in society, to ensure that we have senior management that is reflective of the majority population of the country being women, which is great. This is what we need. Not that we need to be pitied because we are excellent in any case. We don't need to be given extra opportunities. Our opportunities should be equal because we are equal, if not better at times than men. I said it. So I asked, how far are you in recognizing that while you are trying to ensure that you have more women within your ranks representing other women on the ground, that those women can too be non-female bodied beings? The response, should I repeat that? Or did you get it? So the response I got was from one arrogant HOD, said, no, that is a legislative conversation. You should have a conversation with the legislature about that. And for the life of me, I'm still unable to understand how is it that you have a constitution that allows you to identify yourself as whoever that you want. I can be a woman. And you have departments that clearly don't really want to recognize you as you come in and say, I am a woman, but I'm male-bodied being. And then you have statistics when they report. You have statistics when they report on the successes of women that they too give reports that are based mainly on female-bodied beings. It is a shock for most people. But generally, these are the kind of realities that we have in society that we need to be comfortable having conversations about. So that is that. That's just the question mark I want to leave in your head. So basically, in conclusion, if we're going to want to move forward as a country, we're going to have to want to aspire towards a society where people do not have to constantly live in fear. And fear doesn't necessarily mean me walking down the roads, the streets in the evenings and feeling like I am an object to be taken and used however way I can by a male-bodied being who happens to think they have a superior humanity than mine. It doesn't speak to me not being safe at home because another male-bodied being is an issue, and or not being good enough in my workspace. But it also speaks to not fearing that I too can be recognized as a human being who's good enough, whose voice could be heard, whose interests are more than important to represent and not just a third-class conversation to have at the same time, whose ability to be in this country is not dependent on somebody else's political strategy, but is actually dependent on humanity and the common understanding that human beings are equal before the law and should be treated as such. So that's the first thing. And now secondly, we need to then, again, I want to reiterate, look at ways within the current system that we could use, ways within the current system in which we could take steps to ensure that we get to this space. And these ways include, yes, the educational system, the social development departments across all board, but also generally, economically, we can have these kind of conversations. Imagine how great it would be if all sanitary pads producing companies would refuse to sell them. It would be great. I mean, yeah, we need to make profits, and there are people who are hired who depend on these kind of things. But if they would refuse to sell them to anybody but the government, to ensure that actually I don't have to be a poor citizen who is unable, as a little girl, go to school because I am on my period, who is constantly told that when I am on my period, it is a shame that I need to hide myself, and God forbid I buy pads and instead of buying a plastic, walk around in public with them, which I did once 2 months ago, and I was told I was being ridiculous. Don't understand why. These are the kind of things that we need to do. We have condoms everywhere. Go. Having sex is a choice. Being on your period is not. And these are the little things that we need to be looking at. It's not anything drastic, but it's small things, literally, that fix the puzzle and move us somewhere in life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karabo. You had a very passionate speech. I can see our discussion will be quite passionate as well. And thank you very much for highlighting the small pieces which is missing. And also, I mean, we specifically invited some learners today because we want to extend this discussion to not just our usual audience, but hopefully you guys will be inspired and listen to what she said. I mean, there could be some questions about life orientation. I've got a lot myself. What they're actually learning, and hopefully, I mean, that is an aspect we can delve deeper into. Okay, now next up is Sanja Bornman. She heads the Gender Equality Program at Lawyers for Human Rights, so we'll get some practical insight into the struggles women litigants especially face. Thank you, guys.
Morning. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me here as well today. I'm coming to you with a message from the trenches, so to speak, representing women and assisting women on the ground. Lawyers for Human Rights is an NGO, right? We don't take any money from the state because too often we are suing them, so that would be a conflict of interest. And I I want to speak to you very frankly and hopefully point out something today about the women that I turn away. The women who come to Lawyers for Human Rights and other organizations like us, who we end up saying to, I'm sorry, I cannot help you. And I want to talk to you about the kinds of problems that, that women who we turn away come to us with, why we have to turn them away, and the reality of where these women can then go next, or essentially where they cannot go next because there is nowhere else to go. So as Lawyers for Human Rights, of course I manage the Gender Equality Program. As you will have seen, we have other programs as well. But as a public interest law organization, and there are many others like us, some of you will know of the Legal Resources Center, the Women's Legal Center. There are many of these organizations in South Africa, and we fulfill an important role around impact and constitutional litigation. So what does that mean? It's something that not a lot of people understand. It means that we only take on cases that will make new law, that's going to change the law in some way, or get rid of bad law. That sounds great, right? And we're very privileged to be able to work on these kinds of cases and to participate in law reform and policy processes. And make no mistake, South Africa looks great on paper, and I'll speak a bit more about that in a moment. But what this means is that not every single case that comes through our doors, not every single person that walks through our doors looking for assistance, looking for legal representation, looking for legal advice, has an impact case, right? And the reason why we can only work and should only work on impact cases that will make an impact for not just one individual, but many people, right? So that is, we have a limited resources, we are donor dependent, we work with donor funding, and so the cases that we take on, where we actually say, right, I will represent you, I will be your lawyer, have to be the kind of cases that is going to benefit more than one individual person. But how many people actually have that kind of case? How many people actually have an impact case whose particular set of circumstances or particular struggle or particular need for representation is the kind of case that requires making new law, changing law completely, or getting rid of bad law? So to give you a classic example, I will have a client coming in to our offices, which are just down the road in Church Street. And she will be a victim of domestic violence. She will have a maintenance issue around the maintenance of her children. And she will say to me she really wants to get divorced. What I can do for her in that moment is I can give her legal advice. I can explain to her that there is a Domestic Violence Act that allows for her to go and get a protection order against the person who is abusing her. I can explain to her that she can claim maintenance through the maintenance courts, and I can explain to her what to expect when moving through that system, what practical steps to take, what forms to fill in, what questions to ask the clerks. I can explain to her that she can get a divorce through the Southern Divorce Courts here in Cape Town without the need for a lawyer necessarily, in theory. And I can explain to her what to put in her forms and what to fill in and what to ask for and how the division of marital property will work in her particular case. But what I can't do is physically go with her to the court and represent her in the domestic violence court. I cannot go with her to the maintenance court and represent her in the maintenance court, even though her partner might well have an attorney. And because of everything that has been said so far this morning, it's clear that women are not exactly on the well-off end of the spectrum in terms of socioeconomic rights. Okay, so women are less likely to have access to attorneys. Women are less likely to have enough money to be able to pay for legal services. And so these are the kinds of women that I end up having to turn away and say, I can give you this advice. I can explain to you how the system is supposed to work. I can tell you what the acts have to say. And as I've said, the acts are wonderful. The acts are beautiful. We have a very good Sexual Offences Act with wide definitions of what sexual offences are. We have an excellent Domestic Violence Act that, if only it were implemented properly, could maybe really make a difference. We have all sorts of legislation that is out there intending to help women. And the reality is that women cannot enforce their rights in terms of these kinds of legislation, in terms of these laws, because they do not have access to representation. So in our kind of a situation, you have legal advice coming out of our ears in South Africa, right? You can get legal advice from lawyers for human rights. You can get legal advice from legal aid, for that matter. But where do you find legal representation? And even though these systems are, in some cases, they claim to be designed in a way that allows you to move through the system and access the system and enforce those rights without the need for a lawyer, the reality in practice is that that is not true. That is why you see underutilization of things like equality courts, right? So who in the room knows about equality courts? Show of hands. All right, so very few people even know about these courts. These are courts that are specifically designed for people to be able to enforce their rights in terms of the Constitution and in terms of the Equality Act. You are meant to be able to go to the Equality Court without the need for an attorney. But in reality, ordinary magistrates' courts and high courts are sitting as equality courts, which means that the same complicated rules and procedures that apply in those courts in the ordinary sense, in civil cases and criminal cases, will also apply in equality court proceedings. So how on earth is an ordinary person meant to go to that court and know their way around those rules and procedures? The answer is, of course, they don't, and they won't. You need assistance. You need an attorney. You need someone to represent you, and the same can be said for maintenance courts. It takes one obstructive or incompetent clerk of a court to derail an entire domestic violence application, to derail an entire maintenance inquiry, to derail and delay a divorce indefinitely. So even though we say these systems don't necessarily require attorneys, in practice it's simply not true. And a lot of the people who come to us, women who come to us who require assistance, don't want advice, because they can get advice from clinics, law clinics attached to universities. They can get advice from legal aid. They can get advice from Lawyers for Human Rights, Legal Resources Center, Women's Legal Center. What they need is representation, because the rules, the procedural rules and laws that govern these spaces are too complicated for ordinary people to understand. And there's not enough investment in legal literacy in South Africa for these things to really work. So to illustrate this to you very practically, I want to just give you some figures from a survey called the Governance, Public Safety and Justice Survey. This is something from Status A that's just come out, and it was conducted for the first time in South Africa in the 2018-2019 financial year. This is basically an updated version of the very long-running Victims of Crime survey, which we heard a little bit about this morning. And they have specifically tried to jig it a little bit to include themes on governance and public safety and access to justice, especially, right? Because we are talking here about access to justice. And basically this report relies on information that was collected during the census of 2011, but I can't imagine that these facts and figures have changed very much. So to give you a sense of the top 10 disputes or problems that are experienced by women, according to this survey. Number 1, disruptions of supply of utilities, water and electricity, right? So we heard this morning already that very practically speaking, women have issues with this because women are taking care of children, right? They are in the home, they are the ones having to cook the food, having to make sure clothes are clean, and literally taking care of their families. Disputes with neighbors, lack of access to water, sanitation, electricity, and very importantly, housing. And keep in mind there's legislation, existing legislation, that governs all of these issues. Unauthorized deductions from bank accounts by a business, family property ownership, so land, houses, cars, disputes around that, child support and maintenance, right? Unfair charges or fees by companies or banks, violence against women, obviously, that comes as no surprise, unfair utility bills, and difficulties paying personal loans. So according to this survey, these are the top 10 problems facing women. And the survey also says that it's remarkable that there's no overlap between the top 10 most important disputes for women and those for men. If we then take a closer look at what women need in terms of access to justice and how to really make that right meaningful for women, there's a glaring disparity that is illustrated in this survey between men and women on the reasons for why they go to court. So about 22% of men who go to court are there as accused persons. They are there in terms of the criminal law as accused persons, while only 6% of women who go to court are there as accused persons. Almost 12% of men who go to court are there as litigants, right? So general civil court type litigants. While for women the figure is 22%. So what does this tell us? There is a greater percentage of women than men that go to court for administrative civil matters, such as exactly dispute over custody, divorce, eviction. Women and their legal troubles are more civil in nature. And I think that this is I mean, it says here, this survey makes it very clear, and this is exactly what our experience is in the public interest sector. So you would imagine that in terms of access to justice, right, where do women then go for representation? As I pointed out, there's plenty of places where you can get advice, but where do you get representation? So ordinarily, right, under what circumstances does the state make a lawyer available to you free of charge? What needs to happen to you before the state will give you a lawyer free of charge? You need to be in trouble with the law, right? So in terms of Section 35 of the South African Constitution, one of the big jobs of legal aid is to make sure that they give free lawyers to people who are in trouble with the law. And when we look at the annual performance plan of legal aid for the coming financial year, you can see that in terms of budget, and this again is where the budget comes in, right? And this is a very interesting thing, because if you want to see where the commitment is of government, of the state, of anyone in fact, look at where the money is. Don't listen to the words that are being said at the events. Look at where the money is going. Follow the money, and then you will very clearly see where the priorities are. So talk about priorities and legal aid. Of course, their first and most important mandate is to deliver quality client-focused legal aid in criminal matters, particularly for the poor and vulnerable. But as we've already seen, the majority of people who are in trouble with the law are men, not women. The budget that legal aid is setting aside in the new financial year for legal representation in criminal matters is 1.2 billion rand. Okay, makes sense? You want people who are accused to be able to have access to attorneys at the cost of the state. But compare that to the amount of money that's been made available for delivering a quality client-focused legal aid in civil matters, right? So essentially we're talking here about women, because the majority of people who have trouble with civil matters and who need representation in civil cases are women. And here, what do you think the figure is? 148 million. Compared to the 1.2 billion that's going into criminal matters. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should spend less on criminal representation. It is a very important constitutional mandate for legal aid to make those lawyers available to people who stand accused of crimes. But what I am suggesting is that in the way these things are playing out in practice, men are benefiting disproportionately from legal aid in South Africa purely by virtue of the fact that they are more often the ones who are criminally accused, whereas women who mostly struggle with civil matters like child maintenance, like divorce, like domestic violence. These women are not on the receiving end of any meaningful, free, legal representation. Not advice, representation for ordinary, everyday legal disputes that have a direct bearing not only on their lives, but very often on the lives also of their children. So, how can we fix this? If we're saying that, that free legal representation should be made available, whose job is that then? Right? Is it legal aid's job? Can they do it? Or whose job is it? Is it Lawyers for Human Rights' job? Can we do it? Do we have the money to do it? Probably not, right? If we were to provide free legal representation to every woman who wants to go to the domestic violence court, I will have probably about 66,000 clients every year. And that is not a caseload that any one person or even an organization can effectively cope with. So there is, in a sense, very serious indirect discrimination happening in the legal aid system in South Africa. Yes, you have law societies who will make pro bono lawyers available to people who are in need, but those waiting lists are extremely long. It's very difficult for me to send women away, the women I turn away, to whom I have to say, sorry, there already is a legal remedy for your divorce or your maintenance or your domestic violence problem. But I can't represent you because that is not part of my mandate. And this is someone who probably has already been turned away by legal aid. Sorry, we don't represent, we can only give you advice. Now, I happen to think that there might well be a solution to this issue. And if we say that as a country we're serious about gender equality, we're serious about gender-based violence, we're serious about making sure that women have equal access to justice, we need to recognize that the legal needs, the needs for legal representation of women are different to that of men. And that is at the heart of substantive equality, which is what our Constitution has in mind, right? Not normative equality. What's the difference? Normative equality is one for you and one for me, and we all have one and we carry on with it. But substantive equality recognizes that we are different, and that some people might need something that's slightly different in order to have the same outcomes. So we need to think very carefully about how we extend legal representation to include women. If legal aid is not in a position to do so, where will it come from? I think that it could come from the new Legal Practice Act, right? It's a new piece of legislation that governs the attorney's profession as well as the advocate's profession in general. And Section 29 of that act provides that community service may be a part of practical vocational training or a requirement for the continued enrollment as a legal practitioner. This could be a chance, right? This could be a way to make sure that young attorneys who are at the start of their careers provide services, provide legal representation, even if it's under the supervision of already registered practitioners. Is this not an avenue through which we can make sure that women become legally represented in the everyday problems that they face, in the everyday legal matters that really do require representation? Because if we're honest with ourselves, the systems as they stand do not allow for women to navigate those court cases, those procedural rules, those interactions with magistrates and judges by themselves. So this is one avenue, and the minister has to make regulations still that will govern how this community service will work. So there is still a chance for us to make input as citizens, as the public interest sector, as civil society, to say, let's make these regulations in a way that achieves substantive equality for women. And if we agree that legal aid in practice, as it comes down in practice and how these services are made available, mostly benefits men, is this not something that we can throw in the pot that's going to level the playing field somewhat? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sanja. You've really highlighted the practical realities, and it's specifically a field I'm interested in. I was practiced as an attorney, and as a young attorney, I wouldn't have been able to afford myself. My hourly rate was just too much. And it really questions how, I mean, I did okay for myself, but how do women actually access justice? So thank you very much for highlighting those practical realities. Okay, so maybe we should all just stand up quickly and stretch. I think it's, sorry, it's been like quite a long discussion. Oh, wow, getting exciting in here. Again, I'm very, very sorry for any delay. I know you all have very important lives to attend to. Okay, so we're going to have our Q&A now, and Rebecca Sabanda, my colleague, will moderate it. And please participate, ask any questions. We want frank discussions. Thank you very much.
So if you are getting some food or coffee, please just do so quietly. Every time we have conversations about women and justice, I get really emotional, particularly because I am a woman, I'm part of the affected group, but then I also have to acknowledge my privilege in that the bulk of the problems that affect women don't affect women that are like me, that have access, that have money, that have a job. So if I ever have, problems that are legal, I know that I will get them solved relatively quickly. I think that's a point of departure for any conversation where you acknowledge where you stand and make space for those who need the room, who need to be heard. And that's why this conversation, especially when it comes to solutions for women, is particularly distressing. I think one of the threads across the board is definitely political will. So when you ask the questions about where the money is coming from and where it's going, it's from the top down. You need politicians, you need representation and representatives who acknowledge women, who acknowledge their issues and want to allocate funds for problem solving for them. So I'm going to, as moderator, take a bit of liberty and ask my first questions, and then I'm going to open up the questions to you. Because of our time that's limited and because we've already run over, I'm going to ask you questions to be concise. So please don't ramble and give us a point to the note of. So please ask your question, and then we'll get through the session much faster. So I think one of the questions I always enjoy asking is, what if you could pick one thing that you want to see change, what it would be? And then after listening to this conversation, I have to acknowledge that one thing doesn't take account of the fact that we exist in different layers. So my intersectionality demands that I be addressed not just as a woman, but as a black woman, as a foreign black woman, as a middle-class foreign black woman. So all these things are true. And every inquiry about my existence and my problems has to take into account all of those. So what I want to ask is, in an ideal world where the legal system is given effect to, would you have a job? That's what I want to understand. Would the space you occupy be necessary? And if that space wasn't necessary, what would you be doing with your time? And then to Karabo specifically, you speak a lot about representation and your experiences with community members. What is your experience like as the youngest woman in your provincial parliament? Are your issues, or is your voice heard and taken seriously? Have you seen progress from the time your term began in terms of the issues that you represent and you bring forward? Sanja, my question I had for you was, what do you do with women who come to you that you have to turn away? Do you refer them to places where perhaps they could get advice or proper representation? And do you ever, capacity probably is a problem because you probably can't follow up with every single person, but do you ever know how it turns out for them and where they end up? And Professor Gouws, I want to know, academia for me, I found is a very comfortable space, and in the sense that you do a lot of knowledge gathering. How impactful has your research been in terms of legislative change or impact on the ground for women who are affected?
think that's a very difficult question. Now it's not working. Another one. Hello. This one seems to work. Thanks. Okay, that's better. So, in terms of referring people, yes, you do. Obviously, you do try to refer. You have to. And over the years, we've tried to build up a referral network. But when someone is in my office and what they really need is representation, it becomes very, very difficult because there's a set number of organizations where you can refer someone to. You can try to send them to a law clinic that is attached to a university. You can try to send them to the Law Society where they will apply for pro bono. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Where they can apply for pro bono legal assistance, but that is means tested, right? So you get what you call the missing middle there, where a lot of people are either too rich to qualify for that or too poor and the other thing is that very often that the very assets that are used and that are included in the means test calculation are the very assets that are in dispute. So the legal aid will say, but you own a house. Yes, but the house is the thing that I'm fighting over. So can you really realistically include that in the means test calculation? And then legal aid. But again, as I said, legal aid mostly doesn't want to get involved in legal disputes that are of a civil nature. They can give you advice, but very, very seldom do you get representation. So it honestly is one of the most depressing parts of my job, to have to turn people away and say, you can try these places, but I can't guarantee that someone is going to help you. And it very much depends from client to client. Every client is different and has very different needs. And sometimes you can find an attorney at one of the firms that do have a pro bono department or a constitutional law department that says, okay, we'll assist this individual person. But it's very much on a case-to-case basis. And to me, I mean, it's something that, as I say, it really is one of the most depressing parts of my job, to have to say, sorry, can't help you. You can try these folks, but no guarantee.
Let's see if it works this side. So the question is, what has my experience as the youngest MPL in the country been, particularly in the Free State Legislature? What resistance have I received, or whether I've been comfortable? Well, I was having a chat with Ndate Alex. I don't know if he's still here. Yeah, there's Ndate Alex. Earlier on today, and I said the most upsetting thing that I have had to encounter throughout this period is constantly being told that I am a child, that I know nothing, and if I do ever question a man, I'm being told, no, you need to know your place, or again, you're disrespectful because everybody in the room is older than you, old enough to be your grandmothers and your grandfathers. And if I dare question anything they have to say, then I am an ill-disciplined, non-African child who's absolutely, completely devoid from her moral principles as an African child. I'm going to give you an example. So, during the budget debates, I had the two debates of the departments that, the ministries that I serve under. And so, the chief whip stands up, has his speech and says something, together with the chairperson of chairpersons, the chair of chairs. I then stand up because during the debates you have an opportunity to ask a question to the speaker. So I stand up, I'm like, speaker recognizes me, I would like to know if the speaker is ready to take a question from me. Nigga has the audacity to say to me, he then has the audacity, sorry ladies, it's okay, it's fine, can everybody at the back hear me? He then develops the liver to say to me that, this is during the time when I was asking a question, another EFF lady was also asking questions. And he's like, I'm now caught in between two women who are now fighting for my attention, but I'm married, sorry, I can't take you. Wow. And I'm like, how do you reduce the political engagement of female-bodied beings in this house, powerful women, if I have to say so myself, to whatever subject you view a woman who has sexual and romantic relationships with you. I was so frustrated. I was so upset. And what made me more upset, which I still am, was that the speaker laughed together with the premier sitting there and all the other women. And I'm like, Auntie, where are we going? Yes. So these are the kind of things that I encounter. When I speak, I'm told, oh no, you're not black enough because you have a particular accent. Well, my mother paid for this accent. Hello, Amanda. I'm a loser. Hello. She paid a lot. So these are the kind of challenges that I face. And outside the legislation itself, when I go into communities and I have to address more mature crowds than I am, I'm being questioned whether I'm competent enough. And it's very frustrating, and it speaks to a very important thing in society about perceptions and the order of being that we've adopted as a norm. We need to stop trapping ourselves into ideas that restrict one's ability to view a human being as a human being and nothing else.
Now, imagine at my age, the same thing happens, right? So 30 years down the line, you are so angry because every day you have to fight against this nonsense, these hierarchical structures. I'm a feminist academic, so feminists, we talk about a feminist praxis, which means we live what we believe. And so I'm not only an academic sitting in an ivory tower, I see myself as a change agent. So 26 years ago, when I was pregnant with my first child, I started the fight at my university for a childcare facility. 26 years down the line, my younger colleagues are now fighting that struggle. My kids are having kids. So why is it so difficult? I started a women's forum at Stellenbosch University to lobby for better salaries for women. Women with the same qualifications getting not paid the same as their male colleagues. I have started different research projects looking into workplace discrimination, looking at all kinds of issues. I became a commissioner for the Gender Commission because I thought I wanted to make a difference. And while I was there, we started a project looking into the funding for shelters for domestic violence. With the Women's Legal Centre and the Shelter Network for the Western Cape, we did the research of how much subsidy the government should be paying. We wrote a beautiful report, and when we launched it, government didn't come to the party. So it's again the issue about political will. At the same time, when I was a commissioner, I asked this question: how much does violence, gender-based violence, cost the state? So together with the women's, the research unit in Parliament that's headed by a woman, Joy Watson, they started to looking into the cost. That project was then taken up by KPMG. And I just want to ask you, what do you think? A guess, how much does sexual violence cost the state per year? Between 28 and 42 billion rand. And that includes hospitalization, interdicts, court cases, all kinds of things, yeah, across 9 provinces. Did government read the document, the report? I don't know, but it doesn't seem to deter them to do something more concrete about the violence. So I see myself as a change agent, and that makes a very big difference in how you approach your work as an academic.
Thank you so much. I'm going to open the floor for questions now. Gentleman in the pink shirt. Jersey. And then you must just raise your hand. Oh, and the 2 ladies over there.
Okay, is working. I've spent most of my life in education and the last 11 years in mediation and restorative justice. And I just wonder about the need for legal education and critical thinking more generally, because I think that is what is largely lacking in our education system. And it's lovely to have heard that coming from the youth. Good to see so much useful representation here tonight. And then just putting my sort of mediation stroke restorative justice cap on, we've heard just how expensive legal representation is. Is there not a position or a place for much greater mediation plus restorative justice generally at a much lower cost? Thank you.
My question is for Karabo specifically. Earlier on in your speech, you referenced how education was a leading influence for societal influences for young children. As a student, I know with regards to being younger on in education, you refrain from so much as public reference and more towards comfort at home. So the importance of education versus home life with regards to influence of women justice and all that, would it not be more prevalent for home influences to change the mindset of young children? Because only now, I'm in grade 11, so I'm turning 17, only now do I myself, can hold my own opinion to what I believe in and to what I want to see in South Africa as the youth. But that should start from a young age, and that more starts with home. So it's more the influence and the mindset of the country as a whole which needs to move forward, rather than having teachers teaching children in grade 10 to 12 what their opinion should be and starting from then. It should start from 3, 4 at home, which is kind of a bigger grasp to take on.
Okay, you can ask the question and then we'll come back to the panel.
It's another question for Karabo, because you mentioned the relevance of social sciences and life orientations in school. Do you think to maybe implement more consciousness being spread amongst youth in South Africa through schooling systems, do you think it would be better to strip away life orientation and social sciences, or to morph the way that they are taught and stop the conservative view that's being fed to learners?
Good morning, I'm Tembeka from Freedom Park. I just want to ask a question around issues of customary law. I think you who was addressing the issue. Access to justice in context. Access to justice for women in contexts under traditional leadership or under customary law continue to be challenging, even under constitutional democracy. And you pointed out that even the traditional courts and all those mechanisms that are used, they are kind of continue to be discriminatory. You know, they act against women. Now, my question now is around the attitudes which are still patriarchal. You know that are still held, which are part of customary, the basis of how women are treated in rural areas, basically. Now, what I have perceived, and also in the study that I've done some years back, was that there are differences in terms of these attitudes pertaining to older and younger generation, whereby you find that older people tend to have deeply embedded customary values, and as such, they don't want to depart from tradition or customary or those things that could be referred to as discriminatory. They still want their men to be leaders. They still want men to take lead in many aspects of life, to an extent of, even accepting violence from men. So when you ask them on the ground, you find that they are okay with that, whereby, in my case, I would say that really, if we're talking about democracy, can we really maybe redefine democracy to suit different contexts, to suit different sets of women, or what? I don't know. So I just want to get the take on the feel of how the Constitution, can be applied to to fit different contexts and different, without saying customary law should be rejected, because some of those women would really kill you for that customary law, which is perceived to be discriminatory. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your question. So we'll revert to the panel, and you can answer the questions however you go ahead.
I'll try with this thing and let's see how we go. On the issue of restorative justice, I think there's enormous potential, and especially in the context of the more civil type of disputes, right? So maintenance, divorce, custody, even domestic violence in some instances, where I don't think restorative justice has a place is necessarily in terms of sort of mediating something, is in the criminal law context. So unfortunately, there are some prosecutors who are way too eager to mediate the rape case away. And there I don't think it necessarily has a role. The sad truth is, however, if you are going to do restorative justice, if you are going to do mediation and that sort of technique instead of going to a court of law and having it all play out there, you have to do it properly. And to give you a sort of an insight into the South African government's current position in terms of restorative justice, it is something that came up in our discussions with the Department of Justice around the Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill, that controversial piece of legislation that I won't go into in all its glory, but there used to be provision in that particular bill for restorative justice. And in another capacity, I was the chair of the Hate Crimes Working Group, and we were in a discussion with them about having that in the bill, so making very sure that in certain instances there is space for that restorative and transformative, ultimately, capacity. And they basically said to us, sorry, there's no money. We don't have money to make this part of the bill work, so we have to take it out. So it becomes a question of, do you ask them to put it in, knowing that it's not going to be implemented properly? And if you don't implement restorative justice properly, it ends up causing a lot more damage than what it does good, right? Or do you ask them to take it out and then you just don't have it? So it becomes this, again, and you asked earlier if there was one thing I could change, what would it be? Gosh, I mean, I could keep you busy with it for a whole week, explaining all of the things that we work on, and how I would like things to change. But basically, if there was one thing I could change, it would be the money. Show me the money. If you say that women are important, if you say that you want to see gender equality, if you are committed to doing something, really doing something about gender-based violence and inequality, invest. Show me that you want to invest in it. Because if you don't, quite frankly, you can have all the summits and councils and policies and laws and plans you want. It means that you're not serious. Then in terms of legal literacy, I think it's a major gap in the South African, not necessarily the education system. I'm not sure where it should be located. Do you really want to teach kids about the onus of proof in a criminal court? But at the same time, where do we teach people about that? And I think a lot of people have very interesting because they're not always realistic expectations of the justice system in general, right? Because they don't understand how it works. You don't know anything about the courts until the day that you have to be in one. And a lot of people learn about courts and how the court system works from watching television. And so you get people coming to criminal courts saying, Your Honor, Your Honor. Even though that's not how you address a magistrate or a judge in the South African system. So people don't understand how the system works, why certain things work out the way they do, why charges are withdrawn, why bail is granted, and they feel extremely let down, especially by the criminal justice system, as a result of not understanding why things work in a particular way. And it's a major issue, and it's one of the things that at Lawyers for Human Rights we're very passionate about, going into communities and speaking frankly about not just what are your rights, because I think South Africans generally know their rights. It's not enough to know your rights. You have to know how to enforce it, how to implement it. what to say to the clerk when you get to the domestic violence court, what to say to the police when they refuse to open a docket or tell you to go back home and patch things up with your abusive husband. So, I mean, I don't know the answer to the question, but you raise a very important point.
Thanks. So I have two questions. So, but shout out to you guys actually for being powerful already, owning spaces and thinking your voices are powerful enough. You have most young girls who generally wouldn't have done it because they would have thought they don't belong. So shout out to you. Two questions. What's your name? Gabby. So the first question, Gabby, was on home responsibility. So here's one thing. I think the one thing we can agree on is that social progress is a collective effort. It is a collective responsibility. You cannot move forward anyway, economically, politically, if socially things are not okay. So yes, we can have an excellent education system as I propose. The system that seeks to educate people on behaviors and not have to wait a first year Bachelor of Social Science Sociology 101 to know about the behaviors of human beings and how to deal with things, right? But at the same time, you need to be able to ensure that at home we have these kind of conversations, which speaks directly to the importance that you speak of. But then again, this can't only be the responsibility of my mother and father, my siblings and my family in the house. It becomes a societal responsibility. Again, it speaks to changing mindsets such as, one, the understanding that my parents, my biological parents, are the only people responsible for my upbringing. Because then it means that I become devoid from society. I then exist according to the order of my mother and father alone, and not the order of the community and society. So it becomes one web that works together towards shaping a person. South Africa is known for its proverb, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. A person is a person through other people. So these are the kind of things. So, but in future, in order to ensure that we have communities and a society ultimately that marches towards a healthy result of that proverb, we need to ensure that we have an education from a young age that speaks to that. It doesn't come only in high school. It starts all the way from early childhood development. When we speak of this, when you send your child to kindergarten, these are the kind of things socially that you need to entrench in them. You don't need to bombard them with lesson. You do not, I can't think of something right now, but you do not bombard them with all these structural issues and conversations that you would have with a person whose mind is fully developed and they can cognizantly, dissect whatever you say. But you started with the introduction of behavior that starts at a very critical age. When you think of human development, I think from conception till the age of 3 years, those are the most critical times of a child when their identities get and their personalities get to be shaped. And when you move on from that, they then develop on how they relate with other people. These are the steps that need to all together work together. So yes, the educational system is important. Secondly, parents need to take responsibility and quit thinking that schools alone have the responsibility of ensuring that their children become better people in society, ultimately become men who don't rape and think that they're superior human beings than women in society. But thirdly, we need to ensure that we have a system that collectively works towards ensuring that society becomes a better place. And I think this is linked to your question. What's your name? Zakani. Hey, my mom works at a primary school and its name is Zakani, so great. So, here's the thing. I think doing away with these subjects is not going to serve the purpose. Because if you look at the entire name of social science and the entire name of life orientation and the purposes that they're supposed to serve, I'm not supposed to be sitting in class, life orientation, just waiting for the next opportunity to go do practical education or lazy around in the field, run around and it becomes great, yeah, it's exciting, it's as good as a free period, or sit in class and talk about how there are how many universities in the country and which university I could think of. These are the scopes that I had when I was in high school. So, but it speaks directly to being able to reform the curriculum in a manner that ensures that by the time I get out of school, I matriculate and I go to tertiary, I have learned about life. I've learned about what it means to be a young woman in society, the challenges that I face. I've learned what it means to be poor, what are the socio-economic issues that people typically don't only have to be an economics student, hopefully from grade 10 moving forward, to be able to have these kind of conversations that we had. So little things such as those are really what speak to what the curriculum is meant to serve, and how these curriculums can help aid society and to move us into a better place. Did I answer your questions?
So I also want to speak to the curriculum issue, right? So life orientation. I had two daughters who have gone through a girls' school. And for more than 20 years, I headed the Sexual Harassment Advisory Committee at Stellenbosch University. So I often get asked to talk about issues of sexual harassment. And I went one period in the sexual orientation period to talk to, and it was all the girls in the school. And my first question to them was, have you ever been sexually harassed? And there was about 7 hands out of 300 girls. I then explained to them what sexual harassment is, that it's a whole spectrum of behavior, right? From verbal, non-verbal, all kinds of, rape, assault. And when I was done with that, I asked them again, how many of you have been sexually harassed? And it was about 80%, right? So the thing is, if you don't use life orientation to actually educate around issues of relationships, I mean, I think sex education gets done, but it's about the mechanics of sex. It does not teach people what is a respectful relationship, right? And when is something sexual harassment? And so I agree that there needs to be curriculum reform. It doesn't teach students what is a good citizen. Democracy is a complicated system. It's not intuitive, right? There's no civic education. So I really, as a political scientist, think that it's long overdue, and we have tried to speak to the Minister of Education to say, we will help you write the curriculum, right? So there's a willingness to help, but it definitely needs reform. Your question about, so what do we deal with customary law when people actually support certain attitudes? And I've just last year done a study. It was what I call the first gender attitude baseline study in South Africa. So it's never been done that we test the attitudes of people towards gender equality to see what they think. So this study, I'm now in the process of analyzing the data and writing it up. But what's very clear is that there is a generational gap, right? So older people are more, and specific men and women support patriarchy, right? So men as the leaders, men as the heads of households, and all kinds of ideas about even disciplining a woman by slapping her is okay. So my argument is, and I've written a book on this, it's called Gender and Multiculturalism, North-South Perspectives, because it was a discussion with people in the global North and people in the global South. But my argument is that you don't want to intervene in culture so that people start to think their culture is wrong, right? You don't want that to happen. So what needs to happen is that culture needs to change from the inside. And that's why living customary law becomes really important, because of colonialism and apartheid, customary law became codified, so it became very static in many ways. And we wanted to change, but we wanted change to come from the inside. And what we saw, with, for example, this traditional courts bill, the reason why it didn't pass was because of the work of the rural women's movement, who worked with women who live under customary law to ask them, how do you see this? What do you want? What do you want to see in legislation? So then it becomes an organic process where people shape and help shape change. And I think that's the important thing. To make legislation to say, well, just going to outlaw certain things, you're going to have a backlash. You're going to have resistance. So it is working with communities and also specifically the younger people in communities to help also influence the older people. Otherwise, you're just courting backlash, and I don't think that's very helpful.
Okay, we have run out of time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 questions, and then I'm going to close the proceedings. And I might be biased, so I'm going to give the young lady here a question, and I'm going to give the gentleman in the blue jersey a question. After this, I'm sure if you have to leave, then you must rush off. But after we've closed, then you're more than welcome to speak to the speakers if they aren't in a rush as well. Please be respectful of their time as well. Yeah, you can ask your question. Mike, you get a mic? Microphone. Oh, sorry. Okay.
All right. So for me, what's standing out is empowerment. So what I take from everything you've said is that what we want to give us as the youth is empowerment. And that's empowerment as a woman to know that we have this power, to know as men that we can respect women, and also as youth knowing that we have a voice. So let me just Karabo. So sorry, names. So you are representing us actually as youth, as being a young woman. So why is it that there aren't more youth? Why is it that you are the only one? Or actually, that's my question: is who is the next? What's the next age after you? And yeah.
You can answer the questions, Alan.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Traditionally, and I touched on this when I was voicing my frustration about the experience I've been going through in the legislature. Traditionally, it has been understood that leadership is a seat of old men. And if you want to change that modus operandi, you need to at least be an old woman. And so, when you become a young person like myself, who tap into these spaces, you face the resistance that I spoke to. But this doesn't speak to say that there are no other young people who are as powerful, if not more powerful than I am, who exist actually in this space. I actually dare to say all of you young people sitting in here, you are great, you're amazing, and you're more than fit to be able to be a voice wherever you are and represent other young people where you are. So that's the first thing that we need to understand. We grow up in a society where you're told, you go to school, go to the other school, the next school, you graduate. After you graduate, further your studies, you get a job, work for somebody, then think of making changes and strides in your life. Little things like those things are what make it easy for some young people to not think that they can own up to any space and represent. And those are the things that make it easy for older people to think that it is okay to treat young women who actually realize that I am well deserving to be in this space as though they are not deserving to be in such spaces. So the next generation of people that come after me could actually be 18-year-olds, for Pete's sake. They don't need to have been masters holding individuals and professors who are going to prophesy about philosophies upon philosophies of dead beings whose some of their theories are not even relevant to the current discourse in society. So that's where I'm saying there are, but the one thing we need to celebrate is that I'm not the only young person there. There are quite a lot of them, mostly in the National Assembly as well. You look at young people that are there, to name a few, you have your Nasli Sheriff, you have your Uluyolon PT, you have your Naledi Chirwa, the list goes on. And these are amazing young people that I think as young people we should be excited to have their voices there. Your Bakoli, Leno Dada, your Shanganani Gumbi, these are absolutely amazing human beings. So let's celebrate those people and quit actually listening to voices that tell us we're too young to do things, and get out there, because the future is more ours than theirs.
That's true. Our final question.
I would just like to say that real men respect women from wherever they come from. Yeah. But only real men can do that. because they know that women are the fiber of society and the strong ones. And we learn from our mothers and our grandmothers. And the only real men are real men because they had wonderful mothers or grandmothers. They learned from them. Then Dr. Matiri Matai was the first black lady from Africa to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And Professor Amanda Cox was involved in a tree planting ceremony at a daughter's school some years ago to commemorate Dr. Matai's contribution to the development and skills training of women in Nigeria. She planted thousands of trees with those women, destroyed women through war and through all these crises. And then she started giving them life skills. That's why she was awarded the Peace Prize, Nobel Prize. Now we have started a lemon tree project in South Africa, planting of lemon trees, respect trees at universities, schools, factories all over South Africa and in Europe as well, with European culture and South Africans. Respect trees so that we can show by planting young and old, but especially because today was more about the importance of the role of women in South Africa. And I'm amazed that for 25 years, so little has been done by politicians, talk shops, about the role and the importance of women in South Africa. But be as it may, I employ and ask these young students from only one school, unfortunately, but you can tell your other school, your neighboring schools, when you have inter-schools, about the possibility of planting trees of hope and friendship. And lemon trees, because of the health factors, but people are interested in the lemon tree project, can get my details afterwards. I think it's an opportunity for South Africa to get to know one another and to respect women. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for attending. To our speakers, thank you so much. Before I hand over to Christina to close, I want to just say that a lot of the time women are expected to be never tired of having these conversations. And I, for one, know that I have feminism fatigue sometimes. Consistently occupying a space where I have to speak for women, be the standard for women, to always walk into a space and be like, oh, you're a woman, tell us how you feel. It's tiring. It's tiring. But I think the more people that join the conversation, the easier it is to pass the baton, to take a break, to watch development and change take place. So I hope that you all leave here feeling like change makers and taking the conversation further. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm sure we can all agree it was an interesting discussion today, and it was a passionate breakfast dialogue. So thank you so much for all of you to giving your opinions and actually participating in today's discussion. This is a matter close to all our hearts, and I hope actually to see more men, but I'm so glad the men who spoke up today were involved and agreed, and this is not just a limited conversation. So, and the young people today, thank you so much. I was amazed by your questions. I was really totally blown away, and I'm inspired as well. To our speakers, you gave so many different perspectives, aspects I didn't even consider and realize. Thank you so much for making today possible for us as well, and we'll be really grateful. Thank you. Just ask our speakers, we just need to take a group photo. If any of you are interested to ask more questions, if you have got time,